Hello everyone and welcome back to JavaScript lessons on Codecademy. So last time we started looking at loops and why they're so useful. Today we're going to be looking at how the for loop works. So let's get started. So we've gone through the 3 bits of syntax for our for loop, but now we need to know how it works, as I said. So let's imagine the steps the computer takes to run the for loop on the right. So we have those. It's just an example here. So it starts off with I being 2, I equals 2. So it assigns 2 to I. It then asks, is I currently less than 13? Because I is 2, this is true and we continue. We do not increment now, so this does not get executed at this point. Instead, if the condition is met, we run the code. So this code is ran. So you have this being done first, then this part of the code so far. Here the code block prints out the value of I. It currently is 2, so 2 will be printed out onto our console. Once the code block is finished, so everything that's inside these two brackets, the two curly brackets, we increment I by 1 in this case, or you can increment it by 2 if you could just do plus equals 2 if you really wanted to, but for this example we're just incrementing it by 1 by using 1 plus plus. Now I equals 3, and then we check if it is less than 13. So once you've done the part in the curly brackets, you execute the third statement in the for loop, then the second statement in the for loop, just to check if you should do it again, and then you again run the block inside the curly brackets. Repeat these steps until the condition I is less than 13 is no longer true. So that's no longer going to be true when I equals 13 in this case, but it could also equal something more than 13 if that's somehow possible. For example, if you're incrementing by 2, you would get to 14 before you get to 13, because 13 is not in, you can't get 13 by adding 2 to 2 multiple times. So if you get 14, this is only going to be executed 6 times, and when I equals 14, it's going to exit the for loop. If it's not 6 times, sorry, I think it's 6 times, so you have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and then at 14 it exits the for loop. So yes, it is 6 times. So let's see what we need to do. We need to make the computer start counting at 8. So how we do that is just changing what I equals to at the start. Keep counting while I is less than 120. That's also easy. Count up by increments of 12. So how we can do that is easily, as I mentioned before, I plus equals 12, or another way of doing it, a bit less efficient, is I equals I plus 12. Oops, not capital I. You can do it either way, but my personal recommendation is that you do this because it's more efficient. So if we save and submit, we see starting at 8 we go up by 12, but 116 is the last number. You might ask why. Well, if you add 12 to 116, you get 128, and 128 is not less than 120, so it never gets printed out and the for loop is exited. So let's move on. Practice counting down. For loops only run when the condition is true, so when the second statement is true or condition. It is important that there is a way for the for loop to end. If there isn't, then it's an infinite loop and you probably don't want that ever to happen. If the for loop is always going to be true, then you will be stuck in an infinite loop and your browser will crash. If you're not doing it in a browser but in an actual JavaScript compiler, it just won't stop, it will do it forever. So we need to look at the code, and it's telling us that it's bad. What's bad about it is that it's an infinite loop, because when you're starting with 1 and incrementing 1 all the time, and and if you're checking that I is more than or equal to 1, it's always going to be true. So your for loop is never going to be exited, i.e. why it's called an infinite loop. So it begins at I equals 1. It will keep going as long as I is less than or equal, more than or equal to 1. Because now I equals 1, the code will run. We increment I by 1 and now I equals 2. This satisfies the condition. We run the code. And it's always going to keep satisfying the condition. So we will keep incrementing the code up by 1. It will always satisfy the condition. The loop never ends. This will crash your computer. If too much is done and if all of your RAM is used up, yes. So we need to change this code such that it starts counting from 10. Okay, so I equals 10. We want it to stop once it gets to 0. So when I equals 0, triple equal signs, we want it to count down by 1. Okay, so you can do it either I equals I minus 1, oops, and that should be a lowercase I, or you can do a similar thing as with the plus, I minus equals 1. So we're going to be counting down by 1, so we're going to have 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Once I equals 0, I don't think that that's going to be printed out. Let's just check. Oh, your loop didn't log 10 to the console. Such that it starts counting from 10. Okay. We want it to stop once it, while it's greater than or equal to 0. There we go. So I was wrong actually, it does print out 0. So once it gets to 0, oh yes, because 0 is equal to 0, so that's why it works. So, okay, let's move on. Last practice for loop. Okay, you have a great handle on for loops now. This will be the last practice one before we look at cool ways to use them. So the next exercise introduces you to arrays. Okay, so let's actually see what we need to do. That's what we're going to be doing next lesson. Once more for practice, write a for loop that gets the computer to count down from 100 until 0 by 5. This time make sure not to print 0. So we have 4, we have the parentheses, and then we have the curly brackets. So we need to make I equals, I equals 100. And then we want it to count down by 5 and not to print 0. So we need to make sure that while I is more than 0, because if we do greater than or equal to 0, 0 is going to be printed out, but we don't want 0 to be printed out, so we do just greater than and not equal to. And then for our last condition, we need to decrement I by 5. So we do that I minus equals 5. So let's see what we get if we do this. Oops, I forgot that I need to print that, and it was console.log. I'm correct. Console.log I. So let's see, and there we go. We start at 100 and we finish at 5. 0 never gets printed out because 0 is not greater than 0. It's equal. So there we go. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed watching it or learned something new, please share, like, and comment. And if you have any questions, also feel free to ask in the comments down below. I will be answering your question as soon as I can. If you didn't enjoy the lesson, then please do tell me why in the comment section down below so that I can improve for next time. So until that next time, thank you so much for watching and goodbye.